Hey everybody, what's up? This is Jeremiah. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to the 3M podcast. This is the Minister, the Ministry, and Me show, named after my book that's coming out some point. So we just went backwards a little bit with it. So I really had my personal final copy in the publisher's hands. And I'll be straight up honest with you. I ran out of money to put towards the book. And I just decided, let's just publish what we got. And it was really good. It was okay. And then I had a friend last minute that I found out was an English major who said, hey, I will edit that book for you. So we arranged something and she's editing that book, and it's going to be a lot better than it was. I'll just tell you that much. And so we're going back to the editing phase of the book. So if you're praying for that work, it's a book I started like 8 years ago, and that's, how I came up with this podcast. The Minister, the Ministry of Me. This is the podcast where we talk about the minister, who is Jesus Christ, who is God. And we talk about ministry. We really talk about how we can serve God and glorify Him together by serving one another as a body of believers. And then we talk about me. It's kind of my excuse just to talk about anything that I want to, but also to be honest. And so if there's one thing that I really would want this podcast to be, it's a podcast to really encourage us to reflect and to be honest and to challenge ourselves. And when we get more and more into like the episodes where we have conversations, to really encourage us to have honest dialogues with one another in the church. And so with that being said, let's continue this series. So we've been reading through the book, Still Not Professionals, 10 Pleas for Today's Pastors, a resource put out by Desiring God and John Piper. You can find the link to that in the show notes. You can click on that link, you can go to their page, and you can download that book yourself. So I literally just printed it out. I'll give you a tip. You're going to want to adjust, I guess when I went to print it out, it originally printed out really, really tiny. So you're going to have to zoom it in and make it bigger before you print it. So with that being said, our next chapter in the book is called Brothers Build a Gospel Culture. Let me know your thoughts on this book, on this series. Again, jnwheels.com. You can email me directly at jnwheels.jw@gmail.com. Let me know your thoughts on this. This chapter is by Ray Ortlund. I'm just going to read his bio in the book, and it says, Raymond C. Ortlund Jr. is lead pastor of Emmanuel Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Ray is married to Janie, and they have 4 children. That's the shortest bio in this book, I think. Ray's just like, I'm a dude in Nashville. So, brothers build a gospel culture. Gospel doctrine creates a gospel culture. The doctrines of grace create a culture of grace, a social environment of acceptance and hope and freedom and joy. Jesus himself touches us through his truths to create a new kind of community. Without the doctrines, the culture alone is fragile. Without the culture, the doctrines alone appear pointless. Isn't the doctrine creating culture dynamic what we find in the New Testament? For example, the doctrine of regeneration creates a culture of humility, Ephesians 2:1-9. The doctrine of justification creates a culture of inclusion, Galatians 2:11-16. The doctrine of reconciliation creates a culture of peace, Ephesians 2:14-16. The doctrine of sanctification creates a culture of life, Romans 6:20-23. The doctrine of glorification creates a culture of hope, Romans 5:2. And honor, Romans 12:10. The doctrine of God, what could be more basic than that, creates a culture of honesty and confession, 1 John 1:5-10. No doctrinal shortcuts. If we want this culture to thrive, we can't take doctrinal shortcuts. If we want this doctrine to be credible, we can't disregard the culture. Churches where the doctrines of grace create a culture of grace bear living witness to the power of Jesus. I think of it very simply like this: gospel doctrine minus gospel culture equals hypocrisy. Gospel culture minus gospel doctrine equals fragility. Gospel doctrine plus gospel culture equals power. If we want our churches to compel the attention of our mission field, and of course we do, then brothers, build a gospel culture. Don't settle for preaching the truth only. Build a relational ethos that feels like the gospel. It's powerful. Not an opinion add-on. I completely read that wrong. Not an optional add-on, all right? Not an optional add-on. Francis Schaeffer, in his book, The Church Before the Watching World, page 62, wrote this: one cannot explain the explosive dynamite, the dunamis of the early church apart from the fact that they practiced two things simultaneously: orthodoxy of doctrine and orthodoxy of community in the midst of the visible church, a community which the world could see. By the grace of God, therefore, the church must be known simultaneously for its purity of doctrine and the reality of its community. Our churches have often been only preaching points with very little emphasis on community. But exhibition of the love of God in practice is beautiful and must be there. A gospel community is authoritative. Schaeffer used the phrase orthodoxy of community to say that. The beauty of human relationships is not an optional add-on for an otherwise complete biblical church. Gospel culture is an essential to our witness as gospel doctrine. Do you consider purity of doctrine essential? Probably. Do you consider beauty of community essential? Hopefully. The urgency of this depends primarily, of course, on who God is. If God has revealed himself to us as truth only, then beauty of community is merely a preference for certain personality types. But if God has revealed himself as truth and love both simultaneously, then the beauty of true community is authoritative, and it is authoritative. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Colossians 3:15. Wonderful grace. Theology conscientious churches are not always gospel cultures. The Reverend William Still, a patriarch of the Church of Scotland in the 20th century, preaching on Romans 5:5 and the love of God being poured into our hearts, said this: I wonder what it is about pouring all over a great deal of Puritan literature that makes so many preachers of it so horribly cold. I don't understand it, because I think it's a wonderful literature. I don't know if you can explain this to me. I'd be very glad to know, because it worries me. But I hear over and over and over again this tremendous tendency among people who delve deeply into Puritan literature that a coldness, a hardness, a harshness, a ruthlessness, anything but sovereign grace enters into their lives and into their ministries. Now, it needn't be so. And it isn't always so, thank God. And you see the grace of a true Calvinist and Puritan, that is to say, a biblical Puritan and Calvinist, is wonderful. But, oh God, deliver us from this coldness. The problem is not Reformed theology. Inherent within that theology is a humbling and melting power. The problem is when that theology is not allowed to exert its natural influence. Instead, our own native religiosity can create a culture contrary to our theology. And our religious culture, whatever it is, reveals what we really believe as opposed to what we think we believe. If we are ungracious in our relationships and ethos and demeanor and vibe, then we are contradictory. We are contradicting the very grace we preach and disempowering our churches in the eyes of the watching world. But when we press our theology humbly and boldly into the culture of our churches, starting with ourselves and our own need for God's grace, behold how good and pleasant it is. Psalm 133:1. I'll be honest with you guys, this has been, to me, a great series. I'll tell you why. For one, each episode is really short. Praise the Lord. And two, this book is excellent. Let me know your thoughts. That does not mean you have to agree with everything in here, but let me know your thoughts. JadenWheels.com. The next chapter is going to be called Brothers Train Up the Next Generation by Mike Bullmore. So yeah, if you've been following this podcast, you guys, I'm trying to read through this in one night. And by night, I mean leading into the next day. It's 1:13 a.m. here in Aurora, Colorado. And we're still going. This is the last chapter. So that is 11 chapters, 11 podcast episodes in one night. And so I don't know how this last one's going to go. It may get weird. I won't lie. So again, JadenWheels.com. This is the Minister, the Ministry, and Me show. As always, you guys, thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.